All right.
We are live tonight. This is Standing for Truth coming to you. I'm just going to hand it over to RawMatt right away because he's going to be moderating this Origins Showdown debate. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, RawMatt, thanks for moderating this for us. Take the floor, brother.
Awesome. Thanks. Everybody knows Standing for Truth since you're on his channel. So hopefully you know who he is. This is a normal debate since Snake was right. He has been on the show before. He's come on and had multiple topics and debates, been going back and forth. He has a channel on his own and seems like he's growing it and expanding it and going to be talking here about pretty much every subject that they like. Today is an open debate. It's going to be 2 minutes back and forth for a total of 45 minutes. And I don't think there's any rules to this. So if it gets off onto a theological debates, I guess that's where we'll go. And after he's done with Standing for Truth, NephilimFree is up next after that. So if they go the entire 45 minutes, that's okay. And 2 minutes is the maximum time for the back and forth. So it looks like maybe Standing for Truth is going first. If he's ready, then feel free. And if he is not back, I guess I will continue. There it is. Good.
Awesome. Yeah, I can start it off. Okay, well, thanks again, Snake. This should be exciting. Let's get right into it then. Snake, seems to think that, pawns come to people evolution is science. And I'm here to tell you that it is anything but science. But if it does come down to successful, testable predictions given a hypothesis, well, we look to the created heterozygosity hypothesis. And at the end of the day, do you think God intended the command to be fruitful and multiply to be by cloning? And then I think anybody logical is going to think to themselves, obviously not. That's weird. What a strange question. So by answering it that way, you've basically acknowledged a particular and very, very specific genetic view. And that view is that Adam and Eve and the created kinds, they were created with pre-existing functional DNA differences. And this is the created heterozygosity hypothesis I'm talking about. It's both testable and falsifiable because bones found in the dirt, they're not inherited. Traits are inherited. So if we're going to look to the evidence of our hypothesis, we're going to look to genetics. We're going to look to the observable evidence. And this hypothesis is consistent with mitochondrial DNA rates and nuclear DNA rates. Now, given this model, we look to our genome. And we know that the trajectory of discovery at this point favors genome-wide functionality. And ENCODE themselves, they found that at least 80% of the non-coding DNA was transcribed in RNA. And this suggests function. And non-coding DNA, it functions much like a computer. And obviously, given the accumulating papers that suggest function, embryonic development, the timings of protein manufacture, regulatory functions. You said 20 seconds, Matt?
Yes.
Which just means when and how fast to make specific proteins, stagings of proteins for construction of molecular machine switches, et cetera. What type of testable predictions can Snake make? Because given this model of created genetic diversity, we're going to predict that the vast majority of our genome is functional. And all we need to look to now is comprehensive knockout experiments because that's what's going to distinguish between the two models versus functionality versus non-functionality. And at the end of the day, you can talk to many evolutionary scientists who do say that the max functionality our genome could have would be 20 to 25%. Go ahead.
Okay. I heard everything you said, but I'm real sorry. I got to go take care of something real quick. It'll be like a minute.
Okay.
No problem. So what we'll, just so there's no dead air, so what we'll do, I think you kind of touched on it too, Matt, and what's good about this is it's going to be fast-paced, engaging. I'd like to have more debates like this, and to also announce April 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central. We're going to have another debate with Dr. Ken Hovind. We'll be taking on Steam Driven. His name's Adam. So that should be fun. I've had a debate with him. Neff has had a debate with him as well. Both good debates, guys. Check it out just to kind of get an idea of Steam Driven, or he goes by Adam, his style, because he's a cool guy. I think it's going to be a great debate. So there's a lot to look forward to this year. in the world of creation versus evolution. After my 45 minutes is done here, we're going to have Neph jump in as well. So this is going to be a solid, fast-paced hour and a half debate. And hopefully April 12th as well. Neph, you did a great job moderating the last debate, Dr. Hovind versus Snake. So, it'd be an honor to have you moderate that again and have Matt in charge of the question and answer.
All right, thanks.
Sure thing.
Look at that thing.
Just a little eye candy until Snake comes back. Just your friendly neighborhood genetic mutations.
Taylor, can you hear me there, Neph?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if he's there. You can hear me though, eh, Matt?
Yeah, I hear you.
He's on pause. He'll be right back.
No, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just your friendly neighborhood genetic mutation, the thing evolutionists claim designs all the features of every living thing, helping a fly.
Are we having technical difficulties here, the audio?
No, I hear you fine. I hear NephilimFree as well. What's wrong?
He's not hearing us.
Oh, no. Not this again. Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties.
It's Googleitis.
Nope.
The internet's infected with Googleitis.
Yeah, we hear you standing. What's wrong? I can't hear you guys. Wow. Wow. No, I hear you fine, Neph. You're live and you're going on. So
Post the browser and come back. Standing. That might be the only thing you can do.
there you go.
Yeah, there he goes. So anyway, that was just
Bad timing.
We're waiting for Standing to come back. He was having technical issues.
Okay.
Okay, so I was just in the meantime showing a little friendly neighborhood genetic mutation. Just a little.
What mutation?
Just a little friendly mutation. The thing that supposedly designs all living things, helping a fly get a leg where an eyeball antenna is supposed to be. So, real good job there, Mr. Mutation.
Well, you know what that shows?
It shows that mutations are destructive to body plans.
Well, it shows that you can put a leg in a different location or a limb in a different location.
Well, not a different, the wrong location.
Or a different location.
Wrong.
Because not all mutations are bad.
Well, if it's not in the right location, it's a wrong one. So
the right location depends on the environment.
Can't hear anything.
There it is. There you are.
I don't know what's going on here.
We still hear you.
Go ahead, guys. Keep talking.
Okay, so how can I be sure? Okay, so he's going to have to restore his computer or check his audio settings in Windows. Something happened.
No, you can probably hear me, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
Good. But he doesn't hear us, so we're talking.
Are you trying? I hate it, but it's true that Google Chrome works best with Google Hangouts because Google doesn't like you to use anything else. So they designed it so that other browsers don't really work as well. If you're trying some other browser, try joining the Hangout with Google Chrome.
That's good to know.
Yeah, in fact, you can't even join a Hangout with some browsers, I think. Won't let you do it. Firefox won't let Firefox join a browser. At least I've never been able to. It's always telling me Firefox won't do it, but it used to do it.
No, I can.
Wow, there you are.
We hear you.
Yeah, that was weird. I don't know. Okay, so we can. So I missed probably the last 2 minutes of conversation, but I take it Taylor came back.
Yes, he's here. He muted himself because I think he's just waiting for you to figure out the technical problems. So,
okay. Well, thank God we didn't have to shut her down. So I did my 2 minutes. We gave the announcement, so that's good. And we can have Taylor do his 2 minutes.
All right. So basically we can go in one of two directions or both. Talking about mutation accumulation or talking about basic change, microevolution and macroevolution, and speciation. I noticed in Matt's debate with Aaron Ra on the Non-Sequitur show last night, he actually said that he believes in macroevolution. But I think he's still kind of qualifying that as a bush of life, as in you can still get more kinds, but the original one was still created from God. But this then begs the question of, so how different can you speciate? How specialized can a certain accumulation of different traits and divergence from the origin, how big can that get, or how small does that need to be? At what point is that a new kind? And it would seem that you guys would always fall back on phenotype versus the biblical brings forth definition. So I guess we can start there with I'd also want to add that with the bush of life kind of model, that's like 3/4 of the way to evolution, but it still ignores the transitions and links between those different branches, you could say.
20 seconds.
So maybe we'll start off, I guess whatever your preference is, start off whether defining kind or talking about whether or not mutations will accumulate indefinitely.
All right. Good.
Okay, so my turn, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't really acknowledge anything that I just brought up in my first 2 minutes. I talked about the created heterozygosity hypothesis. You say we don't have a model, yet we're the ones that are actually making the testable and falsifiable predictions. You go to bones found in the dirt. Bones found in the dirt are not inherited, traits are. So, what is the real origin of species? And this is why the biblical-based model better explains the empirical data. You talked about speciation. I'll touch on that briefly, but, I'd like you to tell us how much of the genome you think is functional, because we've made very specific and direct predictions on genome functionality based on our model of created heterozygosity. Actually, speciation is better explained given our model. For one, speciation is moving in the wrong direction to support the pond scum to people, bacteria to biologist type of evolutionary fairy tale belief, because that requires upward changes, for molecules to man evolution. And in speciation, it produces only variation within the kinds as a result of, say, the subdivision and alteration of these pre-existing genetic variability. So all speciation is doing is it's bringing the visible expression of this variability and the potential for variation that God programmed, pre-programmed genetic variation into the created kinds. And it's all about the testable predictions that flow from that. So we're actually making testable predictions based on these created heterozygous organisms, because at the end of the day, through recombination, gene conversion, visible distinctiveness is going to be rapid. So no example of speciation is going to demonstrate that pine trees, whales, bacteria, and carrots are all related through common ancestry. So at the end of the day, these built-in alternatives that God, based on this model of pre-existing functional DNA differences, put into Adam and Eve, they're scrambled over time, and new traits might arise during this process. And the thing is, this is a sorting out process consistent with the death degeneration that we see in our genome and in the universe. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't see how created heterozygosity is a model at all, or what it predicts. It's basically just saying God magicked it into existence. It doesn't. I don't see the model. I don't see the rules in that model. I don't see what it's predicting, and anything that's consistent with, that supposed idea. That's not how we do science. We don't go around and say, well, what's the most likely explanation? That could be related to Occam's razor, but that's not really the scientific method at all. What we do to test a model is not to say whether it's consistent with what we expect. That's part of it. That's a prerequisite. But we confirm the model based on whether it makes testable predictions, because you can sit there all day and speculate on, if your trash can flipped over, you can argue till you're blue in the face at whether it was raccoons or the wind. But if one of your guesses is able to predict, say you find footprints near the trash can or something, or you see everyone on the street has the same results,
3 seconds.
and you look up the weather reports, those are the kind of predictions that you need to be able to make. And so what do you think is predicted by created heterozygosity? And how is it a model? What are the rules of this model?
And
go ahead.
Todd.
Okay, awesome. So, based on this model, we've made, once again, direct predictions on the DNA language. We understand very little of the DNA language, but evolutionists have always assumed that, the majority of our genome being, according to their worldview, based on evolutionary leftovers, to be primarily useless. But we now know that, junk DNA does so many different types of things. This non-coding DNA, for example, it's involved in regulation of protein coding genes, the way they're expressed. It influences how we age, and generally introduces incredible degrees of flexibility into how we use these small numbers of genes that actually code for the protein. So I'm looking to gene knockout test, the gold standard of functional testing. We're predicting that the vast majority of our genome will be functional. And with these, as I said, if we're looking to the origin of species, we can even look at nuclear DNA differences, mitochondrial DNA differences. And for example, millions of species based on our model in, say, 6,000 years is not a problem at all, because all of this suggests that God did create. So it's not just magic, because it's all about the testable predictions that actually flow from the hypothesis. So if we're saying that God created Adam and Eve and the created kinds with these pre-existing functional DNA differences, obviously we're going to expect that the majority of our genome is functional, of course, to some extent. And we've seen ENCODE reveal that over 80% of the genome is transcribed in RNA, which suggests function, suggests genome-wide function. A lot of this is preliminary, and that's why we're making these direct predictions. And with millions of these DNA differences, massive amounts of DNA variety encoded into each kind from the start of their existence, the potential for speciation is mind-boggling, and it's a better explanation given our model of pre-existing heterozygosity. And combine that with the fact that species, we now know, can recover enormous population sizes in only very short amounts of time, in addition to the fact that the vast majority of our DNA sequences at this time within a creature appear to be functional. These results demonstrate that millions of species in a few thousand years is not only plausible, but it's almost guaranteed. So I still need to see some testable predictions coming from your side, and we can see mitochondrial DNA differences and rates fit better with the creation model as well, given the predictions that we're making. But if you don't have any specific predictions, maybe we win in this hypothesis. Thanks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joe. Whatever.
Okay. So I didn't really hear you go over any predictions. You said direct predictions on the DNA language, and then you didn't really expand on that. I think you're kind of suggesting that you predicted that the majority of DNA would have some kind of function, and that's still not been proven. So your prediction has not been verified. Most of the DNA seems primarily useless. It could have some kind of function, but it's essentially negligible. So it's basically an effect so little that it doesn't even matter if you measure it or not. And we have performed knockout tests on mammals, specifically mice, and we found non-functional gene elements. And we have found some functions to non-coding DNA, like regulatory functions, but that doesn't mean that every single line of code in the DNA has a function. Jury's still out on that. We have a ton of evidence to suggest that the maximum amount of functionality in humans, at least, is about 25%, and so that prediction has not been overturned yet. You say there's massive amounts of DNA variety, and that goes again towards evolution, because we see unique deviations in shared genes that are conserved among creatures that share phenotypic traits. So that would suggest that not only do we see the same type of genes being used for similar things across different organisms, and you would say that that would be common design or common tools, but we observe that these common genes, they mutate through the generations. So and they're also, those mutations are inherited, and most of those mutations are unique, and we can see which unique mutations are being inherited. And so the uniqueness of those mutations suggests the opposite of special creation, because it has been changed, and the fact that it's a deviation of an already existing trait that you could say is created, but that unique deviation is present only in things that are related to each other.
Sorry,
that's what's interesting.
Well, I do appreciate Taylor's great zeal for his science fiction-based religion. There you heard it, folks. He believes the maximum amount of functionality in the genome is only 25%, even though ENCODE has already revealed that over 80% of the genome is transcribed in RNA, suggesting function. The preliminary data, the trajectory favors genome-wide functionality. Evolutionists, they're science deniers at the end of the day. We already see that based on this preliminary biochemical evidence for function. It doesn't only exist for the known function of, let's say, pseudogenes, for example, but also for at least 80% of all pseudogenes in humans. And given the known data, it's obvious that the other, say, 20% may still yet to be found to be functional in some human tissue, or even under some physiological condition that has not yet been studied thoroughly. And he said, you know, well, for one, genome-wide gene knockout tests haven't been performed on humans, and sure, they've been done on mice, but many non-coding RNA genes, let's say pseudogenes, once again, since evolutionists look to those heavily as evidence for evolution, they're only expressed under certain conditions. So at the end of the day, you know, the junk DNA paradigm, that era is dead, because scientists are finding that numerous of these so-called fossil sequences are not pseudo after all. These genes are necessary and required to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. So this model of pre-existing functional DNA heterozygosity is being confirmed more and more and more. The changes we see, they are adaptations, of course, but they're based on losses of information. They're, you know, these beneficial mutations, they're environmentally dependent, they're deleterious, they're adaptive degenerative changes. We see that many known and praised genetic markers, say the beta globin pseudogene, you know, they've been overturned because, for example, the broken remnants of an ancient chicken gene that they like to use, no such remnant exists, and instead the fragment appears to be a functional DNA element. So all evidence is confirming the created heterozygosity model. I've got another testable prediction that has been confirmed as well. Dr. Jensen has written an article on it. There's been observed finch species that have gone from shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity, leading to new species quick, just as we have predicted, given the model of created heterozygosity. So I still see no testable predictions coming from Taylor. It's all pseudoscience. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Do you want testable predictions in general or predictions specifically about mutations? Because I gave you a prediction that 25% would be functional, and that prediction has not been overturned. We've talked before about the predictions that originally confirmed the evolutionary model, specifically about the fact that we can predict which rock layers, which fossils are going to be in based on our model, because our model has rules that say these types of things will be found in these layers. And those rules can change a little bit, like, oh, well, we found out it was a little bit earlier, but it's never anything so revolutionary as the model predicted something completely different. And we've also been able to predict fossils that we had no idea what they even were. We've never even found them before, but we predicted that they were there because our model is so accurate. So we can go over other types of molecular predictions later, but I want to address what you have said here. So about encode, you said it's encoded in RNA and this suggests function, and no, it simply does not at all. Just because something is encoded in RNA doesn't mean it does anything. Just like the fact that it's encoded in DNA doesn't mean it does anything. There are some functions to DNA and RNA elements that don't code for protein. That doesn't extend to all of them, and that hasn't been shown by ENCODE. You don't seem to understand it, and you're misappropriating the results because your interpretation was rejected by all the scientists.
20 seconds.
So why do you think that you're more qualified than the professionals?
Cutting early? All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, awesome. No, actually, the fact that ENCODE has revealed that, over 80% of the genome is actively transcribed into RNA does suggest function. And the thing is, there is accumulating data suggesting further function. And then that's why our direct prediction is based on the DNA language itself, because at the end of the day, we speak less than 1%. As far as I'm concerned, given the lack of gene knockout tests of the DNA language. And all you got to do is look at the history of genetics. Taylor, back in the 40s, it was one gene, one protein, one function. So many things have been overturned. I mean, genetically speaking, evolution is it's dead. So many things have been overturned. I mean, even human chromosome number 2, they say, arose through a fusion of two ape-like chromosomes. That purported fusion site is actually a functional DNA element in a human gene. So junk DNA is dead. They always say, humans and chimpanzees share genetic mistakes, but these pseudogenes appear to be functional DNA elements, not actually mistakes. As I said, back in the day in the 40s, it was known as one gene, one protein, one function. So many things overturned. RNA, for example, used to be underappreciated. This is decades ago biology. There's massive literature showing unexpected functions of RNA. Evolutionists, as I've said, they hope, they dream, they imagine that pond scum to people evolution is true, but it's just not true. It's pseudoscience. And our DNA code, it's a highly compressed DNA code beyond the best computer code. We write books, but we don't write books that can be read forwards and backwards. DNA can. Look at protein moonlighting.
20 seconds.
Proteins are doing things you wouldn't even anticipate. This redundancy, for example, the cell uses different redundant elements to slow and speed the process. It's a highly compressed DNA code, and that also suggests that the DNA code is also polyfunctional and polyconstrained, and any change is going to be deleterious to some extent. I'll address his fossils after. Thanks.
2 minutes is quick.
So I'm not sure if you misspoke there or if you said 80% of the genome was shown to code into proteins, or whether you just said RNA. But again, that doesn't suggest a function just because it's in RNA. And nothing in evolution has been overturned. I mean, maybe a couple of small little things, but in general, you said that in general, we've just added more complexity. You said that DNA making protein, that central dogma has been overturned, but no, we know that DNA makes protein. It still makes protein. We still believe that it makes protein. We've just added, oh, it also does a couple other things like regulatory functions. And you touched on evolution proceeding on loss of information. It also proceeds on the gain of information. If I'm not mistaken, I think on the Non-Seq show last night, they mentioned that you are a computer programmer. So we could talk about what you think is adding of new information in a code. And again, adaptive degenerative changes, still evolution, still possible to get different kinds, especially if it's degenerative, you're going to see completely different creatures. Maybe we evolved from some perfect creature with a perfect genome. Maybe it was a blob, but who cares? We're still evolving. Loss of information can still cause a change of kind. That's still evolution. And I don't think you'll ever address what is the minimum amount of change necessary, or the minimum amount of difference necessary between two organisms to be a different kind.
So I'm not too sure if Taylor doesn't understand the fact that the functions of DNA here, they're going to distinguish between the two models. Bones found in the dirt, they're not inherited, traits are. So I need to see, so if he's going to say that 25% max is functional, well, I mean, at the end of the day, that's already dead. And the evolutionists are saying that because any more than that disproves pawns come to people evolution, because the amount of deleterious mutation accumulation makes evolution, that type of evolution, that is impossible. For the evolution model, all differences in, say, nuclear DNA are due to mutations. Taylor will admit to that. But in the biblical creation model that I am presenting here, differences in these DNA regions, mitochondrial DNA, nuclear DNA sequences, are due to design and mutations, obviously, after the fall, very little mutations. But when comparing DNA sequences in similar genes in different families, evolution says that all differences are due to mutations, while we're saying that the differences were designed with distinct functionality. So that's why our prediction on non-coding DNA regions, evolution, as you heard from Taylor, says much non-functionality, which is pretty much just denying science and the DNA language itself, while we predict genome-wide functionality. And results from ENCODE have suggested that at least 80% of the genome is functional, and these results are preliminary. But to anybody who believes in empirical scientific data, the trajectory is clear. Most non-coding DNA in the human genome is functional and at least serves in a regulatory capacity, but only systematic knockout experiments can fully demonstrate this. So get the evolutionists into the lab, and to get from bacteria to man, as he's talking about, there must be a mechanism to add new genetic information, such as genes to make arms, legs, brains. So in reality, tweaking or altering or even changing the genome of say, a bacterium or any other organism for that matter, or whatever you want to use, duplication, mutation, it's not going to result in a human genome. So he's going to have to give us beneficial mutations to counterbalance the accumulating damage. It's as simple as that. Go ahead.
Okay, so I still are not really presenting a model that I can tell. You can't distinguish between created kinds or created and mutated genes, and similarly, you can't point out a single created kind or an original kind. Sorry, that's the phylogeny challenge. Because every time you nail something down as a kind, we can show you that it differentiated into other things and it has precursors with the same traits. Not to mention dating again. I have still yet to hear a single excuse for how chemistry has been overthrown and how radiometric dating has been overthrown. And these are the results of ENCODE project. The vast majority, 80.4% of the human genome participates in at least one biochemical RNA and or chromatin associated event in at least one cell type. So you said the trajectory supports your prediction that most of the genome will have some sort of significant biochemical function. Well, this clearly shows that the net was cast so wide that it's just anything that does anything if it interacts with any part of the cell at all. So that includes a lot of stuff that the cell will not miss. RNA that does nothing, that's still included in this. It's being translated into RNA. That doesn't mean it has any function beyond that. Just being translated into RNA is being counted as a function in the encode. And so that's why you're trying to mix these two different usages.
20 seconds.
Just because it interacts with another chemical in a cell does not mean that it's necessary for the cell, and does not mean that it's part of the cell's evolution. There you go. I'm done.
Well, as you can see here, Taylor, once again, is a science denier in favor for his wild, imaginative belief that, elephants and pine trees are related through common ancestry. But junk DNA is junk science at the end of the day. The junk DNA and pseudogenes, they're going the way of the vestigial organs, for example. It's due to ignorance. It's due to a misunderstanding, a lack of understanding of the DNA language. And our prediction comes true more and more every single day. And then in regards to the speciation rates, the speciation that we've seen in finches taking shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity. I mean, it's all confirmed predictions based on our model. And this junk DNA pseudogenes, they cannot actually be called upon anymore to support universal common descent. So say deciding to label them, useless doesn't actually argue for universal common descent. And at the end of the day, we're just beginning to understand the developmental process, how coding and non-coding DNA coordinate when, where, and how structures are sequentially put into place to produce a fully functional organism. He talked about, the radio metric datings, and the thing is, they're based on some impossible, unknowable assumptions. We can actually look to the genetic, we can look to the genome, we can look to the mitochondrial DNA differences. We can see that evolutionists has over predicted, the mitochondrial DNA compartment and under predicted the nuclear DNA compartment. But the thing is, our model that created heterozygosity completely is consistent with all the data. And to say that, it's being transcribed, but it's not actually functional, that's a lot of energy for the cell to do something that doesn't actually have function. And an ENCODE researcher himself said almost every nucleotide is associated with a function of some sort or another. And we now know where they are, what binds to them, what their associations are. So obviously to deny that fact is to deny science. And Taylor loves citing the circumstantial evidence of fossils, bones found in the dirt, when I've already told you it's traits that are inherited, not bones found in the dirt. And that type of evidence, it's just circumstantial evidence because it doesn't actually have a theory to cling to. We see deleterious mutation and accumulation. Mutations are destruction, not construction. Natural selection is a fine-tuning mechanism. It's not going to build a genome at the end of the day.
Okay, so I'm not sure why you're calling me a science denier when 99% of the scientists disagree with you. I think it's a little bit of rhetoric there going on. Your prediction has not been confirmed. Just because it's translated to RNA does not mean it has any function beyond that. It could just be RNA floating around. And you just said the vast majority of nucleotides have a function. All nucleotides have a function. I'm not sure if you misspoke there. A nucleotide are those 4 bases, A, T, G, and C. So ENCODE is using the term function much looser than even you are. So it doesn't seem like you understand their results. I'll read it again. The vast majority of the human genome participates in at least one biochemical RNA and or chromatin associated event. So that's just, that's even looser than I described last time. So a chromatin event is just the unfolding of a gene. So it's just, they're saying, even if this gene gets unfolded and it doesn't even get translated into RNA, that then ENCODE is counting that. So do you understand that that's not even doing anything? It's just getting exposed and then put back. The chromatin is basically how the DNA folds up. And you mentioned traits are inherited, not bones. But these bones are a certain shape because of inherited traits. And we see these traits change such that it's the same type of organism, just changing slightly through the rock layers. There doesn't seem to be any boundary between them, and you guys will admit that phenotypic similarities is how you tell a relation between organisms, not whether they can bring forth or not.
Time.
So we really need to nail that down at some point.
Time.
Awesome. So it looks like his big prediction is still based on bones found in the dirt. And the thing is, arranging things in order the way Taylor would like it to happen is just anti-science. I can arrange a bicycle and then a tricycle and then a four-wheeler. And we've got 2 wheels, 3 wheels, and 4 wheels. Wow, that's proof of something, all right. Well, I can then put a 2-wheeled bicycle and a 4-wheeler and predict there must be a 3-wheeler somewhere out there. And lo and behold, there's a wheeled, the bicycle, and it's not predictable transition. Arranging things in order doesn't prove how it happened, and the circumstantial evidence, it doesn't hold up because there's no theory to actually cling to, and in the apparent progressions that he could look to in the fossil record, they're of course based on the assumption of universal common descent, because phylogenetic systematics, classification schemes, taxonomy, cladistics, for example, it's all based on a primary assumption that universal common ancestry is true. But based on what we know about genetics, it's obviously not true. And in light of the built-in capacity based on this pre-existing heterozygosity of God's created kinds to adapt independently to different environmental conditions, selective pressures, just like we've seen, say, for example, with with the finches and various other species, we'd expect to see such biodiversity not only today but also in the fossil record. And of course, they can look to any bone found in the dirt, and based on their initial assumption of pawns come to people evolution, they can pretty much make a story out of anything. But the reality is that we've only just begun to uncover the functionality of the human genome, and you can just consider just how many experiments would actually need to be performed to conclude with any real sort of confidence that a particular, say, set of DNA sequences has zero function. So for him to say that the max is 25% is absurd on many different levels, because the number of possible scenarios in which a DNA sequence might actually plausibly function is now proving to be massive.
Time.
You said time or 20 seconds?
By the way,
was that time or 20 seconds?
That was time. Sorry, okay. You didn't. 20 seconds. Cool. I'll be numbered.
Okay. So with your bicycle example, if you were actually able to predict before tricycles were ever discovered where the first tricycle and who was going to invent it, then you would have some sort of model that, at least if you were able to repeat this pattern like evolution does, then you would have some sort of model that would be able to at least somewhat accurately predict when and who is going to invent what thing. So in science, we have this with evolution. We can predict over and over with many different organisms where they're going to be, and before we've ever discovered them, this also occurs. Let's see. Hopefully that makes sense as far as how you build a model and how you test a model. And the difference between saying that something is consistent with your model and your model actually making a prediction that is able to advance the field, which is also testable, because you could make a prediction and it could be true, but if it's not testable, you're never going to know whether it's true or not. So that's one of the problems with your model is well, one, I don't even see what your model is. Two, I definitely don't see how it's testable because I don't even know what it is. But I don't understand how you're going to test anything based on the supernatural. And basically, it seems like we're trending more towards macroevolution. So I'll just ask you this and end. How far can God's created kinds change? What's the limit?
Time. Steady. You're up.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Well, you know what? It's funny because the actual fossils that he could look to as, say, transitional, the ones that he'll look to, say, like Archaeopteryx, I mean, evolutionists themselves have said, you know, it's a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. Tiktaalik, for example, you know, the claimed tetrapod traits, they're consistent with many living and extinct lobe-fin fish species. And with the recent discovery of in Poland, the tetrapod tracks that predates Tiktaalik by nearly 20 million years, the evidence couldn't be any more clear. It's not a transitional by any means, and we would predict mosaics based on the design model. I mean, look at a amphibious assault vehicle. It blends the features of land and water. Look at crossover SUVs. You know, the Dodge Journey, the Ford Flex. I mean, they're unclassifiable. But the thing is, you're going to have millions of these transitional fossils. And look at whales, for example. The presumed transitional forms, including Pakicetus, Ambulocetus. Actually, it's a matter of fact that Ambulocetus is very doubtful because it has its eyes raised up on top of its head in a very strange way, and it's unusually large for an early whale. And even evolutionists themselves are saying that maybe it's not even in the main line of whale evolution, because unlike whales, they have eyes on the side of their head, and Ambulocetus had eyes near the top of its head, similar to a crocodile. So if leading evolutionary experts seriously doubt, say, Ambulocetus and a lot of these other transitionals as intermediate, why should we believe that these bones found in the dirt are evidence at all? We've made clear predictions based on genetics, and I think the entire debate can be summed up in 3 words that he just said in his 2-minute rebuttal there. I don't understand. And you know what? I think that's obvious here, given the fact that I've given clear predictions based on the DNA language, genome functionality, based on created heterozygosity. He's going to have to show us how beneficial mutations in natural selection can counterbalance the accumulating damage, because we see death, degeneration in the genome and in the universe, all consistent with the fall. I mean, I'll get into some more predictions after this, but he only says that it can only be 25% functional because at the end of the day, due to genetic degeneration, the evolution of man would be impossible. And I have a paper that talks about how problematic it would be that even if the genome was even just 10% functional, that it would be impossible as well, that type of large-scale evolution. And we do see clear limits. I mean, but maybe Taylor, how much time do I have, Matt?
Yeah, time.
I'll get into the kinds after.
Okay.
So you mentioned, I think, just one prediction, and then all the evidence points against that. So all our population genetics, all the math shows that we would have already died out as a species even within a 6,000 year period. And the ENCODE project, which you're just misinterpreting, which seemingly is your best evidence, is just showing evidence of stuff that has absolutely no function whatsoever beyond getting unfolded or translated into RNA. And that is effectively junk, because just getting exposed to water or getting transcribed into RNA, that doesn't do anything. It's not necessarily. RNA bits can do things, but we've shown examples of ones that don't do anything, such as knockout tests. And I think you would even agree with that, because you admit that some fraction of the genome is junk. So I don't see what the controversy is. And as for the fossil record, these traits don't just pop out of nowhere. They're all inherited, and we see transitions between them. The Tiktaalik is the same type of organism as all these other things that we're saying are related to it. It's still a fish. just like the mud skipper is still a fish. You can't use your model to tell us whether that was a created fish or an adapted fish. So as far as I'm concerned, you don't have a model at all. We have observed accumulation and formation of new traits in generations of organisms. You're the only one arguing for something coming from nothing, and you have to invoke magic to do it. We've never observed any of those happening. And okay.
Our model of pre-existing functional DNA differences makes testable predictions. He can deny the functionality of the genome all he wants, of course, but the evidence is certainly clear. And the Bible makes numerous other predictions, retrodictions. I mean, looking at the Adam and Eve story in the biblical-based model, we can make numerous predictions. And matter of fact, the Bible predicted this thousands of years ago. If we started only with 2 people, all the people today should have a low genetic diversity. If we started with 1 million people, as would have us believe, you're going to have a lot of genes floating around a population of say 1 million strong. But if you only started with 2 people, what that does is it restricts the diversity today, and over deep time, any large population will accumulate enormous numbers of mutations, resulting in enormous amounts of genetic diversity. And this is a serious problem here for Taylor and you know, his fairy tale belief in fish to fisherman evolutionary theory, because it's now clear that mankind has very limited genetic variation. And while the observed low genetic diversity is a massive problem for the evolutionary perspective, this is most certainly expected and predicted from the biblical perspective. And from the biblical model, we all come from just 2 people. So this obviously means that limited diversity is easy to explain. As I said, the Bible predicts this. If the Bible is correct and Adam really is our ancestor, there should only be 1 male ancestor of humanity. And the small number of mutations that separate modern men from the sequence of Y chromosome Adam, say, indicates that this man lived in the relatively recent past. And based upon the actual observed mutation rate for the human Y chromosome, for example, studies themselves show that the Y chromosome Adam lived just thousands of years ago. These findings are strong evidence supporting the literal Adam
20 seconds.
And Eve of the Bible, as a matter of fact, because you can look at mitochondrial DNA, that little piece of DNA inherited from our mother. So all these many biblical-based predictions, retrodictions, are exactly what we find in modern human genetics. And what's the chance of the Bible being made up? And the biblical story mirrors what we actually see in human genetics today. 2 Peter 3 says in the last days there's going to be scoffers denying 3 things, you know, the creation, the flood, and the coming judgment. So it's all confirmed prophecy.
Top.
So that's not how predictions work. You also have prophesized that Jesus himself prophesied that the world would end before the people he was speaking to would die. So 2,000 years later, here we go, and we've seen multiple cults. A lot of them were young Earth creationists, predict that the Earth would end, and we have not seen that. I don't understand why you think our interpretation of the data is pseudoscience. We don't have any bias. It would seem that you guys have a bias. There's multiple creation institutes that make their so-called scientists sign affidavits that they will never produce results that are against creationism. That's not science. And you said that pre-existing functional differences make testable predictions. Again, you didn't even predict ENCODE, and the ENCODE results don't support your model. Just because something just because a DNA got unfolded that's not a cellular function. And if you want to talk about consistency versus predictions, the flood is absolutely consistent with what we see in reality. Give me any or all the rules you think that the flood sorted the animals by, and we'll show that not only can water not do that, but that's not even the pattern that we see in the geologic column.
20 seconds.
I'll just end there.
Oh, standing. This is your last 2 minutes.
It's been 45. You can add one more to this, and then we can get Neph in there. No, obviously, if you actually read biblical prophecy, read over Revelation, we know that the end times, if you look to the rapture, the tribulation, it's all going to happen once there's a one world government, one world religion, one world leader, and the mark of the beast obviously is instituted as probably what's going to be a microchip, because there's going to be one world currency. So we haven't seen any of that yet. So his interpretation of end times is just obviously absolutely wrong. What he said earlier with mud skippers, yeah, mud skippers produce mud skippers. Mud skippers are still having baby mud skippers. Dogs produce dogs. You know what? I want to ask you: are there any limits, physical limits, genomic limits? Can you get a dog as big as a whale? Because we know there's animals as big as a whale. Like a whale, can you get a dog as small as a mouse? Like a pygmy mouse? I mean, they're both mammals. There's animals that exist that are as small as a mouse. And at the end of the day, if you want us to believe that pine trees and whales are related through common ancestry, and yet whales produce whales and pine trees produce pine trees, well, you're going to have to actually show us some empirical evidence for that. And you haven't shown us any empirical evidence for that. In the last hour, you've resorted to bones found in the dirt. I've said bones found in the dirt are not inherited. Traits are. I've made very specific retrodictions and predictions based on our model of created heterozygosity. And what do we know in light of the evidence, Taylor? Rare beneficial mutations that you haven't even pointed us to, they cannot and will not compensate for the relentless influx of deleterious mutations. We know 100 new mutations per person per generation. The bottom line is that, natural selection happens. It's a fine-tuning mechanism, and all it's going to do, based on the unselectables, it's only going to remove the worst deleterious and detrimental mutations, and it's only going to amplify the very best beneficial mutations. So the accumulating damage is largely invisible and unselectable. And evolutionists like Taylor, they're going to have to address the key issue of net gain versus net loss. Taylor likes to talk about trade-off with these beneficial mutations, more rescue devices, more science denial. While the genome is degenerating and while a few nucleotide sites may be improving, huge numbers are being degraded. I mean, to deny this is to deny empirical science. And this type of trade-off that Taylor often speaks about in regards to environmentally dependent beneficial mutations, it's so evidently and obviously not sustainable, as it will result in a shrinking functional genome size, because you're throwing out lots of information, a ton of information from lots of nucleotide sites, and you're trying to replace all that information with, say, a single desirable point mutation. I know we talked about a point mutation in our last discussion, and at the end of the day, most beneficials, they're reductive, and things are not obviously being taken forward. They're degrading. Any example, I'd like to see his best example, but any example that you see presented by the evolutionist. How much more time do I have, Matt?
You were out. I was trying to say, but I don't think you could hear. You were on fire. So
no problem. Go ahead, Taylor.
So I want you to name one prediction made by created heterozygosity. It doesn't seem like you're clinging to encode anymore, because I've shown the absurdity of stretching those results that far. Other than that, again, you don't have a model. What can we predict from that? There's nothing you can say. You can't describe it to me, even. It doesn't mean anything. What is the difference between a created and a mutated gene? You can't tell me. You have no model. And I'm asking you what the limits are to speciation. Every transition proposed by evolution is a speciation within kind, and within reasonable proven mechanisms that are just small changes. And you talk about accumulating damage, and then you say it's unselectable. Well, if it's unselectable, then it's not apparently making the creature suffer at all, because it's not affected by natural selection. So that doesn't go towards your point at all. I'll steel man you and go. I think this is where you're going, because let's say, they're basically slightly deleterious, but they're unselectable until they accumulate. Well, I've already shown you how different combinations of these accumulations are worse and better, and some will perpetually just be within the acceptable range, and the combinations that aren't good are going to be killed off. There's also compensatory mutations, and we have most of our data as actually for compensatory mutations, and that is that will actually fix the deleterious effects of deleterious mutations. A deleterious mutation can be compensated by about 9 different intragenic compensatory mutations. Deleterious mutations that were more severe were significantly more likely to be compensated for. That's from a study on bacteriophages. There's plenty of studies how compensatory mutations will repair the function of proteins, and that has been used to predict how to create new engineered proteins. And the fixation of slightly deleterious mutations that you talk about is exceedingly rare and has been shown to be easily compensated for. The average proportion of deleterious amino acid polymorphisms is about 70%. So about 70% is being selected for. Only about 10% are slightly deleterious mutations. And we see about a 20% rate for compensatory mutation. So we can easily see, and the math proves this, that the compensatory mutations can easily outweigh any accumulation of these mutations, at least given an environment that isn't too mutagenic and healthy population levels, things like that. Okay.
All right, Standing. 2 minutes is the last one. Okay.
This is the last one.
Yeah.
Awesome. So as you can hear, a lot of rescue devices, whether it's compensant mutations that can compensate the accumulating damage, or synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, back mutation. I mean, none of it is going to counterbalance the accumulating damage. They're unselectable for a reason. And ENCODE did reveal, he's the one denying it. And no one denies that they define function as specific biochemical activity. But since junk DNA is non-coding DNA, why is it being transcribed into RNA? Evolutionists like Taylor are saying that this RNA isn't doing anything. But at the end of the day, we know that it's not idle. There is activity associated with it. And obviously, Taylor believes that it's nothing more than evolutionary leftovers that hasn't actually been eliminated from our DNA yet. But it hasn't actually been shown that this RNA is non-functional. And the trajectory is obviously clear based on everything that I've been saying, that it is a trajectory for genome-wide functionality. And he still hasn't even given us an example of a beneficial mutation that adds new, novel, meaningful information to the genome. The biggest praised examples you can see: African resistance to malaria. That's due to a broken hemoglobin protein. You can look to melano mutation. I know Jackson Wheat likes to use that all the time. That's based on a loss in net specificity. Aerobic citrate digestion by bacteria. That's another big one. You'll see the E. coli experiment, for example, that Lenski's demonstrating. Actually, Lenski's demonstrated that bacteria produce bacteria, but Taylor here wants us to believe that bacteria and whales are related through common ancestry and hasn't provided any evidence for it. And that aerobic citrate digestion by bacteria, that involved the loss of control of the normal anaerobic citrate digestion. Nylon digestion by bacteria, another huge praised example, that involves a loss of substrate specificity. Gene modifications, those are universally deleterious. Does Taylor believe pineapples and dogs are related to a common ancestor? If so, I want to ask him, was that ancestor a pineapple or a dog? I mean, based on the law of monophyly, that's more consistent with created kinds in a biblical model. And did it turn into something that was whatever it was? Dogs produce dogs going forward. What about backwards? Obviously, Taylor believes that dogs today, population of dogs today, came from something that was non-dog long ago and far away. And if he believes dogs and pineapples are related, then they both at some point had to come from something non-dog and non-pineapple. He's got a wild imagination. That's why I say evolutionists hope, they dream, they imagine. For one, that mutations are actually going to make things new and better, and that pine trees and whales are related through common ancestry. It's science fiction, religion. We're making the testable predictions, and we're making them in genetics. Genetics is destroying pond scum to people evolution, and it's demonstrating the truth and validity of biblical-based creation. Taylor's presented nothing. I think everyone's seen that. Thanks, guys.
All right, Taylor, you're up. You get to finish it.
All right. So we've seen that you only have this one example, and it's not supported by any of the science or any of the experts who conducted the science or who peer-reviewed the science. So no, ENCODE counted anything that was translated into RNA or was even exposed in its chromatin state. We have plenty of knockout studies showing a lot of DNA and RNA do nothing. It doesn't even code for anything, doesn't have regulatory function. You don't need it, nothing. So standing for truth is using the fact that we have found that most genes are exposed at least in one cell type or translated into RNA. He's using that to make the massive pseudoscientific leap into saying that all of those actually either have some sort of regulatory function or a code for a protein or have some sort of other vital cellular role to play. And that is not shown by ENCODE whatsoever. And so that was his only supposed prediction, and that was not confirmed. Again, predictions are how we actually confirm the model. So if you could show that, you would be taking a step towards confirming your model, but you would have to show it repeatedly and repeatedly. Evolution does that with seeing what's in the rock layers. I have shown that they are related because you agree with phenotypic classification of kinds. And we have shown that the model of assuming that they're related actually gives us an accurate model of where they are in the fossil record. No pattern of sorting that you can give me will look at will show the flood layers that we see. The microorganisms, supposedly the lightest, would be at the top by your model, but they're at the bottom. And dogs produce only dogs, of course. All changes proposed by evolution happen within kinds. What's the limit within that change? So we didn't evolve from bacteria. Bacteria diverged from the first cells. Eukaryotic cells grouped together. They began communicating with each other. This communication became genetically encoded, and it became necessary for their survival. Then they started differentiating tissue functions and cell functions. Then each version that was born was modified through the successive generations. So there's never any single step where you see much difference. It's always a modification of the parent generation. So when you see body parts repurposed for other things, you see genes repurposed for other things, and we see the evidence of this happening. We see it happening in real time in the laboratory. We with certain selection pressures, we see that we can induce deleterious mutations, but we also see that the rate of compensation is very high. And we also see de novo orphan genes pop up in, there's a study on Drosophila flies.
Okay, so that's like 3 minutes. So it's over now. Since he went an extra minute over, I'm going to say no. Lab tests have revealed that bacteria, after generations and generations and generations, bacteria populations produce more bacteria. But you want us to believe that bacteria and pine trees are related through common ancestry? You provided no evidence for it. So I'm gonna end with that, since you just went on for an extra minute. And what we're going to do is have Neph go for a half an hour with Taylor, same style, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Matt, you're doing a great job moderating, brother. Just make sure that it's, a few seconds past 2 minutes, that's fine. But for half an hour, and if Neph's okay with that, and then we'll end it for the night. It's been fast-paced, engaging. It's been fun. Neph, how do you feel, brother?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Who feels like going first?
I mean, I can go first, or he can go first. I have to. I'll be right back in a couple minutes, though.
All right, Neph, don't start now. Just take up time, introduce, talk about, talk to the audience for a minute, whatever you like. But I won't start the time yet.
Okay, I'll just talk about various things. If you don't like grilled cheese sandwiches, you're a nut. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. Okay, everybody who's sane enjoys a good grilled cheese sandwich. So. And
I agree with that. That is some
grilled cheese sandwiches are proof of creation, because you can't get cheese without milk.
Remember, evolutionists believe you can lose it all and gain it all.
Yeah.
all we see is deleterious mutation accumulation. But, Taylor wants us to believe that a single-celled organism turned into a multi-celled fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, bird, monkey, man. Here we are. Genetically superior. We run, and he's talking about lab tests. Lenski himself is demonstrating special creation. I mean, these bacteria populations, they've shrank in genome size. They're losing genes left and right, losing information, adaptive degenerative changes. Bacteria produce bacteria. And I love how they go to the law of monophyly. Oh, we expect dogs to produce dogs, but long ago and far away, dogs today came from something that was non-dogs. No, the law of monophyly, the fact that we can't outgrow our ancestry, demonstrates created heterozygosity. God created original created kinds. They've diversified. They've adapted to selective pressures, environmental pressures.
Everything.
They haven't outgrown their ancestry. There's your limits. They're the ones that believe that dogs and bacteria are related, and yet no evidence.
Everything is evidence of creation. I mean, you wouldn't get the matter that comprises everything in the world if the laws of nature didn't exist and they came from a lawgiver. So you don't have the cheese unless you have the milk. The milk came from a cow. The milk is produced by genetic information in the cow. The genetic information proves the cow was created. There isn't anything that you can think of that's not proof of creation. Everything, whether it's an oxygen molecule, or whether it's pyrite, or whether it's a hamburger bun. It doesn't matter. Everything that exists is proof of creation. Everything. There isn't anything that evolved. The whole idea of evolution is a myth. It's a crazy idea that things come into being, whether by successive chance associations of prior somethings or some other method. But it's all the idea that things arise by natural processes. And that's not true. What we find is things degrade. Mountains erode, rocks roll down hills, and a crystal and a snowflake is the only thing the evolutionists can point to. But that doesn't account for complexity. And those things themselves will degrade and fall apart. A snowflake will melt, and a crystal will fall apart in time as well because of molecular rotation and vibration. Molecules are rotating constantly.
Well, it's well, that's why I always say.
So, I mean, if you had a steel bar and you sent it into outer space with a rocket, and you were able to go check on it after 4 billion years, you would find dust. You wouldn't find a steel bar anymore, because the molecules in the steel bar are vibrating and rotating. And as they do this over millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of years, they're going to disassociate from each other, and their bonds are going to be broken, and you'll have steel dust floating in space. There'll be no more steel bar. So everything degrades. Entropy is a law of nature.
Okay, so so it looks like Taylor's back. Matt, if you want to start the clock, it's now 2 a.m. Well, at least here EST. We'll go right till 2:30, 2, back and forth. We'll start with you, Neff. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so anybody who believes evolution and argues for evolution after the evidence that refutes it has been put forth to them is a science denialist. They're believing in evolution because they have some reason they need to, not because there's any scientific validity to it. Evolution is not science, it's pseudoscience. These are the different kinds of mutations that occur. Missense mutation, nonsense mutation, insertion mutation, deletion mutation, duplication mutation, frame shift mutation, chromosomal translocation. All of these are destructive. Every one. They cause a loss of genetic information. If you piled all the studies in genetic mutation that have been conducted since 1930s up, the papers themselves would form a stack multiple stories high. 1 million studies since 1930s. Not once has it been demonstrated that mutations can design or build anything. Nothing. They don't design anything. Here's a statement. I'm not going to read these. Theodore Dostoevsky from Evolution and Genetics in Man, 1955. He states, all of our experiments on flies with mutation cause deformities. 1955. Move forward to 1983. ABC Gordon Written Taylor, chief science advisor for BBC television, The Great Evolution Mystery, states the same thing. Can't even get a new enzyme this way. Flies deformed in all the labs. Okay, move forward to 1991. What? The same thing. Okay, Lynn Margulis, the famous evolutionist scientist, same statement. Move forward to the present day. Jonathan Wells, PhD, molecular biology, University of California, Berkeley, same thing. So it's decade after decade after decade, the scientists have all consistently and constantly acknowledged mutations don't design a thing. They destroy. They cause weakness, deformities, and death. That's what they do. Evolution is a myth. Evolution, if evolution were true, mutations would have to develop. Okay. That's my time. All right.
Yeah. I mean, you can talk for another 5 or 6 seconds if you need to finish the sentence, but yeah, 2 minutes.
All right, so I guess 99.998% of scientists are all science deniers. For some reason, we all just decided to stop doing science and sign an affidavit that says we're only going to accept evidence that supports our religion. Oh, wait, that's the creationists. You guys are the ones who do that, who deny all evidence that goes against your assumption. So Neff also falsely claims that all of these mutations that he listed off are destructive and cause a loss of information. Some of which he actually mentioned are actually duplications, which is actually more information. And it doesn't matter whether it's the same information or not. You're still causing more of it. You still have more Lego pieces. I still gave you more bricks. Plus the fact that these duplications can now deviate. That's the point. He willfully and deliberately ignores that. He can only focus on one data point at a time and cannot make connections between the two. Of course, mutations don't design anything. Why would anyone say that? Only someone who doesn't understand what they're talking about would ever say that. Mutations create deviations, and the environment selects which deviations will continue on and survive. You demonstrated earlier that we can mutate flies with legs on their head. This demonstrates that the genes which encode for limb placement, for example, or any other feature or trait, they can be moved around without killing the organism. And you also mentioned entropy is a law of nature. And yet, there are also forces that are laws of nature that work against entropy. Is entropy your god, or does entropy subject to those forces?
Time. No, you're up.
Okay, so well, we've got Taylor lying for evolution again, saying duplication mutations add new information. They don't add any such thing. They destroy information. He says that it's not true. Well, that's not true. It's been known for decades that duplication mutations cause a loss of genetic information. Where the genes get duplicated and inserted, typically causes a loss of information at that spot. Genes get broken. Now, if you like sources for the things I'm saying, just pay attention to this. What's on the screen? Go back and read this at your own time. I'm not going to go through this. I don't have time for it. Duplication, including block duplication and chromosome duplication, causes a loss of genetic information. It's a fact. So Taylor just said something scientifically, absolutely, completely wrong. So, I mean, it's bizarre what evolutionists will tell you. So this is what evolutionists will claim. They'll point to immunities and to antibiotics, variations in size, color, shapes, or pattern, loss of a feature, loss of function, disease, deformity, and death. That's what we observe about mutations. But evolutionists claim genetic mutations design fantastical things. In fact, everything. All the features of every living thing. Nobody's ever observed that. Ever. And not in 90 years of studying mutation, a million studies, nobody's observed such a thing. Nobody. So it's a crazy myth. Look at the design, this obvious design in living things at the nth scale is absolutely mind-bending. Look at these creatures and their astonishing complexity at the smallest scale. To believe this is produced by random mutation is nonsense. This is a flea. Look at the design in this flea. Its features are so unfathomably complex.
No, I just gave him 6 seconds heads up.
Oh, sorry.
Didn't give him 20. Sorry, Neff. That was your time.
You can have a little more since you got cut off.
Okay, go ahead, Neff. 20 seconds.
Okay. Now that the design of living things even at the microscopic scale is so unbelievably great that you have to be a science analyst to believe evolution. Look at the fantastic complexity of the different structures in this flea. Now, this is how small a flea is. You see, those are human hairs. That's a flea. If you could zoom in with a microscope, a scanning electron, even greater than that, you'd see more and more and more and more complexity the more you look. If you want to believe that random mutations, unguided natural processes design this, you're welcome to. But that's not science. It's never been observed.
It is science. It's absolutely science. That's what literally all the scientists, except for a statistically insignificant amount of young Earth creationists, are looking at. You say, look at the astonishing complexity. That's pure nonsense. That's an argument from ignorance. Just because you can't figure it out, because you're not trained in it, because you never went to school for it, doesn't mean anything. That's an argument from personal incredulity. Pure nonsense. Your argument relies on magic, poofing things into from nothing into existence, and you can't even tell me or present which were created and which are adapted or mutated. You're denying science, sitting there telling all of the professional scientists that they're science deniers. How does this even compute in your brain? It's like you don't even understand why there's a consensus. Of course, you rely on some conspiracy that we already know, blah, blah, blah. You're a mind reader. Anyway, you lied about some more mutations. You presume that since some mutations are deleterious, that all mutations are deleterious. And this is an even more indefensible leap than your argument from ignorance, because that is just the most pure dishonesty I could even use as an example. Just because some mutations cause a dysfunction does not mean all of them do. We have plenty of examples that do not. You even showed an example of a fly with legs on its face.
20 seconds.
That didn't kill the fly. You've never gone to school for this, but you presume you're correct, but you're capital W wrong. Let me read this for you. Reciprocal translocations are usually an exchange of material between non-homologous chromosomes. Estimates of incidence range from about 1 to 500, 1 in 625 human newborns. Such translocations are usually harmless.
Time. Neff, you're up.
Okay, so that's Taylor. You keep saying things that are scientifically discredited. It's bizarre. The flies that you said it didn't kill them, yes, it did. You let them out into the wild and they die. They can't survive outside the lab where they're spoon-fed, so to speak. They did die. You mutate a fly with a leg where its antenna is supposed to be or its eyeball is supposed to be, it's dead. Because you release it to the wild where it normally would be, and it's dead. It will die. So that's false. Now, here's one type of mutation, missense. What does it do? It disrupts cell functions. Oh, that's a good thing, huh? What is it called? Cause proteopathy. What's that? That's disease caused by deformed proteins. Nonsense mutations disrupt cell functions. Cause what? Proteopathy. Insertion mutations disrupt cell functions. What do they cause? Proteopathy. Deletion mutations, they cause what? Proteopathy. So all these mutations cause deformities, weakness, and death. Duplication mutations cause proteopathy and disrupt cell functions. Frameshift mutations do the same thing. Repeat expansion mutations do the same thing. Chromosomal translations, those are really nasty guys. You can get Down syndrome from one. Okay, so this crazy, ridiculous anti-science myth of evolutionists that mutations don't do destructive things, they design everything, is contrary to 90 years of scientific observation. It's a myth. These people they're out of their minds when they say mutations design things. They do no such thing. Nobody's observed any such thing. Here's design for you. The Issus bug. It's got gears on its legs, so that when it puts its legs together and springs to jump, it jumps exactly straight forward because an equal amount of force is applied to both the left and right rear legs. It has gears.
Right. So it's an argument from personal incredulity. You don't understand how it happened, therefore God. That's nonsense. And I never said mutations don't do destructive things, and I never said they design things. That's a pure lie, plain and simple. Please stop that. You keep saying things are scientifically discredited when there are entire fields that have explicitly discredited and rejected creationism. Geologists have published entire dissertations about how the flood could not have occurred. And you, Neph, you cannot give me a single criteria about how the flood sorts anything without contradicting yourself. Go ahead, give me one. Heavy organisms found at the bottom? Nope. They're found throughout. And we find the lightest organisms of all time at the bottom. I could go on and on and on. Ability to escape? Nope. Found all throughout the record. Again, you make the absolutely indefensible leap that because some mutations cause damage, all of them must. This is a lie that cannot be abided. So I think I'm going to use that as my sticking point here. For example, the loss of function of one mutation can be suppressed by another mutation. The CAR3 motor domain mutations, for one example. Another example is the creation of a pseudogene from tooth genes in whales, and then they have baleen. We've been over the antifreeze proteins over and over and over, and you still deny the science that mutations can create new functions out of existing material. I don't know why you can't connect these two dots. It's like you can only focus on one thing at once. You can't see the forest through the trees. How much time do I have?
15 seconds.
All right, I'll just end there.
Okay, so yeah, we've refuted you about the antifreeze. I'm only here to help you see how ridiculous your beliefs are. The antifreeze proteins, there are numerous species of fish that already have these antifreeze proteins. To believe they observed one come into being, you have to do all kinds of mental gymnastics that the studies didn't show. So your belief that mutations design things is what evolutionists are stuck with having to believe. And it's nonsense. I'm going to provide right now some empirical scientific evidence that every evolutionist, when they see it afterward, is 100% science denialist. It's just a fact. Look, I'll say this clearly. Science has proven, as far as science can prove anything, that life was created. Evolutionists can't swallow that, but hey, that's their problem, not mine. Genetics has algorithms in it. Algorithms are mental processes. An algorithm is a procedure and actions which are specified in order to accomplish a goal, such as solving a problem. Specification and ordering to accomplish a goal requires forward thinking. Forward thinking is a mental activity, not a material one. Problem solving involves consideration and decision making. Consideration and decision making are mental processes, not material ones. Therefore, it is empirical that mental activity is the cause of algorithms. The molecular machinery of the cell performs algorithmic procedures prescribed by genetic information. Therefore, mental activity has designed the algorithms that are in genetic information. These are facts. This is not debatable. You can say, no, it is so, but it is.
20 seconds.
Science, since genetic information and algorithms are supremely complex, the mind which designed them is supremely intelligent. Now, scientists have discovered that the algorithms and the genetic information in living systems is so supremely excellent, they're trying to mimic it to make software for computers, and the algorithms they're coming up with by mirroring the software in the cell is superior to man's best computer schemes.
time.
So not all of these fish have these proteins, and not all of the there are fish within that kind. There are cod who don't have antifreeze proteins, and there are some cod who do have antifreeze proteins. I wonder how that happened. You sit there and pretend like mutation cannot bring forth a different kind of gene, but we literally see that there is almost no difference between the antifreeze gene and another gene that encodes for a digestive protein. So by the known mechanisms of mutation, we can absolutely get an antifreeze gene from that precursor gene. You pretend like that's not possible. It absolutely is. It's only a few base pair changes. And this goes to show that your God is a terrible, terrible designer. It's a copy of an existing gene. Why would God give some of the fish this ability and others not this ability? What a terrible designer. We also see multiple versions of this antifreeze protein across species and across, as you would say, kinds. This would go to show that your God is an inconsistent designer if he had designed any of this stuff. That again, if God designed everything, he wants us to believe in evolution. Because why would God, if he's using a common toolbox, he would give each species that he gave antifreeze proteins to would have the same gene and the same antifreeze protein. And yet even fish don't have the same antifreeze protein. They evolved it along different paths. They're encoded by different genes. Insects have a different antifreeze protein. It's a completely different protein, completely different gene, similar function though. That goes to prove that your designer did not do that. Or if he did, he wants us to believe in evolution. But since that we've never even seen a special creation, not even once, there's no reason to make that unscientific assumption.
Todd. Neph, you're up.
Okay, so before the flood, Taylor, the Earth was globally tropical from pole to pole. There was no need for antifreeze proteins. The only reason organisms have them is because they just happen to have some genetic information that makes a protein that happens to have this effect. Your belief that it evolved is just bizarre. Some genetic differences exist. Lots of genetic differences exist in lots of creatures. That doesn't mean it evolved. Okay, the common designer would explain that. Now, I want to show you something again, and just here to refute you, and show that your worldview is anti-science. Again, this is a genetic algorithm. Now, what you see right here on the screen is an actual algorithm that exists. Actual algorithm that exists and is used. It's happening right now. It's being employed right now in every one of your cells at this second. Now, if you can explain to me how an abstract construct of mind requiring mental processes such as consideration, comparing of information, forward thinking, etc., such as that, and consideration of results can be produced by material processes, you'll be on to something and you'll overthrow God. But until then, evolution theory is in the garbage can, and that's where it's headed. Because it's impossible, you see. By this alone, I've proved evolution is false. And intelligent design is proof true. By these bits of information right there. That's all I have to have. I've already won this debate. I'll win every debate. I'll win if I was to debate Michael Shermer or Neil Shubin or any other evolutionist or Richard Dawkins. And I walked up to the microphone and I said, I'm going to prove evolution is false and intelligent design is a fact. And I read what's right here on the screen and I put my books down and walked out of the auditorium. I have won the debate. Because it is impossible for material processes to produce mental abstracts. And those are what defines every living thing.
Time.
I'll give that.
Perfect.
You just lost this debate. You just admitted to me that antifreeze protein evolved. You just said that the world was a tropical world pre-flood and that the fish adapted this protein from pre-existing genes to have a different function. You just admitted to me that that protein evolved. I don't know how more clear-cut it can get than that, folks. As for mental processes, I guess computers are alive and conscious. because they run by algorithms. I guess gravity is alive and conscious because they behave according to algorithms. I guess I just overthrew God. Let's see here. Going back to the mutation thing, again, Neff just admitted that it is an adaptation and that it was created by mutation. So let's just go over some of the specifics. So a gene was duplicated, and then it was changed slightly, which created a slightly different, well, not necessarily slightly different, it just created a different protein. This different protein has a different function now. He just admitted my entire point. Well, 99% of my point. The rest of my point is just simple addition. If you add up those changes over time, you're going to see kinds branching off from each other and accumulating different traits. I ask you, and not one of you has ever answered this, what is the minimum amount of difference between two organisms that can constitute a different kind? How far do they have to differentiate? You've already admitted that they differentiate. You've already admitted that mutations can cause them to differentiate in beneficial ways.
Perfect. Go ahead, Neff.
Okay, so Tyler, now you're Taylor. Now you're lying about what I say. I did not say what you just said. I've never said mutations can cause organisms to differentiate in beneficial ways. What? I didn't say that. I didn't say that I admit, as you just claimed, that the antifreeze genes evolved. I didn't say any such thing. I said you didn't pay attention. Genetic information varies from one type of creature to another. God made many kinds of life. Okay, one may have had a protein that so happens to provide an antifreeze function, and the other not. Doesn't mean that it evolved. It was created that way. Okay, so you've misrepresented me. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't lie about what I say and put words in my mouth. I said no such thing. Now, here's back to this example of the isthmus bug. I want to show the insanity of evolution theory, the insanity of it. To believe that this feature exists on the legs of the isthmus bug, you have to believe that random genetic mutation produced it. Accruing random genetic mutations not only built one of these teeth, but it built another one. And it built them in a curved form manner. And this is a close-up. It goes on much longer than that. In a curved manner, not just on one side, but then it did the same thing on the other side. And guess what? It alternated the teeth so that they mesh when they roll together. Now, if you're willing to believe that random mutations designed this, or if random mutations can work together so that the cusps of the upper teeth in an organism and the bottom teeth of an organism can just happen to turn out so they work together to grind food, you have left the planet, because this is empirical evidence of intelligent design. Anybody who sees this in their right mind thinks design. Only an evolutionist who staunchly needs to deny God would look at something like this and believe that random mutations design the left and right gears on the isthmus bug's legs so that they mesh and they alternate at the right angle so that they provide this incredible function like the gears in a transmission. You can believe that if you want, but that's not science. That's your crazy religion. That's what that is. That's an unsupportable religion, and it's just nonsense. Science has refuted all this nonsense. And looking at the legs of an isthmus bug or the cusps of the upper and lower teeth in any organism make it clear how insane evolutionism is.
Okay, so now you're trying to cover for what you said, but it's on tape, and I just listened back to it. So you said before the flood, the earth was globally tropical. No need for antifreeze protein. Just because the fish had existing genetic material that transformed into a protein with a different function. That's what you said.
No, I did not say transformed. Go back and listen to this room. I did not say that.
You said one may have added a protein to the other.
No, I did not say that.
Oh, yes, that's verbatim. That is verbatim.
No.
Yep. Just listen back to the tape.
One may have. had the code for protein.
That's evolution.
So
you're also interrupting me during my time.
Don't lie about what I say.
You're lying about what you just said.
We can debate
on
it, but
quit interrupting me.
Don't put
Can we have some moderation here?
Bad. Okay. I don't know if I can actually pause people, but go ahead, Tyler. You'll get a chance.
He said one may have added a protein, the other did not. This is evolution. He said that they didn't have it when the flood was globally tropical, and now they do, due to, and I quote, may have added a protein, the other did not. That's evolution. You just lost this debate. As for what we were talking about yesterday, let's see here. I have a study. You were complaining that I said your research was outdated. Here's a study called X-ray microtomography of carboniferous stem Dictoptera, new insights into early insects, dated 14th of April 2010. So yes, they are adding insects to the fossil record, continuing past 20 years ago. So yes, your research is very outdated. Yeah.
I'm up?
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I actually said. I'm going to prove that Taylor lied about what I said. Here's what I actually said.
Unless you guys wanted an extra turn around each, but this will be your last round if you guys want it to be.
Before the flood, Taylor, the Earth was globally tropical from pole to pole. There was no need for antifreeze proteins. The only reason organisms have them is because they just happen to have some genetic information that makes a protein that happens to have this effect. So that's what I actually said, Taylor. You just heard it for yourself. So again, you lied about what I said. You said I say that they evolved. I did not say that. I said they just happen to have some genetic information that produces a protein that happens to provide the function of antifreeze. But you lied about me, didn't you, Taylor? You lied. You put words in my mouth. You lied for your evolution theory. It would be nice if evolutionists didn't feel like they have to put words in the mouth of a creationist and lie about what they say. And I just caught you lying. So don't do that. You can debate honestly. If you feel like I don't need to lie and I don't need to put words in people's mouths to make it sound like they said or admitted to something that's evolutionary or that they acknowledged evolution or something to that effect, I don't have to lie about what they say. And I would appreciate it if you wouldn't lie about what I say, especially when everybody can hear what I say. Anytime I have left, I'll give to Taylor.
All right.
Yeah, so I quoted you verbatim. You're still lying. Of course, you would never say they evolved. You dance around it and you describe evolution without actually using the word. So yes, you're lying. You're beating around the bush. You also lie about evolution to make it sound more ridiculous. It's classic straw man. You just make up this ridiculous straw man and then say that's what scientists believe. And then we come and tell you, no, that's not what we believe. And you insist to us that that's what we believe, and that's a lie. You do have to do this to perpetuate your ideology. You said before the flood, the Earth was globally tropical, no need for antifreeze proteins. You did say they evolved. You just said it right there. You didn't use the word evolve, but you said it. Unless, are you now stipulating that God created special kinds after the flood? Or because you just implied that they evolved this, they developed, they adapted, whatever word you want to use, this antifreeze protein post-flood after they had a need for it because they already had pre-existing genetic information that could turn into it. So yes, you just admitted my whole point and you lost the debate.
Okay, so Taylor, no, you just lied again. I didn't say any of those things that you said. I said that
I quoted you verbatim.
I said that Taylor, we heard what I said. I said that they had the genetic information that codes for proteins that just happen to provide the function. I did not, where in there is a statement that they evolved. There isn't any. I said they had the genetic information that just so happens to provide that function. All right, I didn't say that it evolved. Now, so Taylor, you're still lying. Now, I have to cut out of the debate because I have to do something for my wife. I'm sorry. I have to go do this, and I can't put it off. So I've got to leave, but I have refuted you. And Taylor, don't lie about what people say when you debate them. Don't put words in their mouth because it makes you look bad, makes evolutionists look bad. Thanks for playing. I'll see you.
All right, quit lying. Yeah,
right.
so we just caught him lying. He played back his words. Of course, he would never say the word evolve, but he just described it, and he ignored that explanation. He did describe evolution, plain and simple.
If these anti-freeze proteins arose through an epigenetic change, that change was based on a built-in pre-existing genetic information. So
That's evolution.
a non
That's still evolution.
well, it's not adding new, novel, meaningful information like Neph's saying. He's not
Yeah,
saying
it
it's
is.
a new gene that's been added. It's an epigenetic, non-random mutation based on built-in genetic adaptation, like we believe in. So that's not the type of evolution that you would like. Are you admitting that this anti-freeze protein came about through an epigenetic change?
It's not. Well, why would that change anything? Do you program or not?
I'm not a computer program. Someone said I was a computer program.
A new line of code, it doesn't. You're still using the same 26 letters or numbers, same 10 numbers, but a new combination is a new line of code. It doesn't matter if that's a new gene.
Right. So
I don't understand
I'm just showing you why, Neph's not saying that it's a new novel gene. He's saying that it's an adaptation based on built-in genetic adaptation. So,
well, most genes are modified from other genes, so that's what evolution predicts.
Right. But the whole point in this is, are you still there, Neph? Okay.
No,
okay. So we finished the debate here. So we did, you know what? It was fun. I think this format, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, fast paced, engaging, went by quick. So maybe we'll decide.
I'd like to see 1 minute back and forth.
Yeah, 1 minute back and forth probably would have been a little tougher than we thought. But anyways, guys, thanks for joining. Hope the audience enjoyed. It's going to be a fun year of debates. Once again, April 12th at 2 p.m. Steam Driven versus Ken Hovind, and some other exciting debates after that as well. Okay, guys, everyone have a good night. Neph, Taylor, RawMatt, thanks for joining. We will talk to you later.
all right.
Peace out.